You first saw it on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were for engine calibrations and lukewarm synth coffee. It was a day like any other, grease under your nails. The low hum of the station's life support was your constant companion. You were looking out the viewport of your workshop. You weren't looking for anything special. Just a moment of quiet, a brief rest before wrestling with a stubborn fuel injector. The star field outside was always the same, a beautiful, predictable spill of diamond dust. But that morning, it was different. A line, a faint, dark line against the morning stars. It was almost invisible. You had to squint to see it properly. It looked like a scratch on the viewport itself. You even wiped the reinforced plexiglass with a greasy rag. The line remained. It was out there, in the deep black, a flaw in the perfect engine of the night. You had seen a lot of strange things. Glitches in hollow screens, weird sensor ghosts. You once saw a cargo drone try to dock with a vending machine, but you had never seen a scratch on the sky. It was perfectly straight, utterly black. It did not reflect light. It simply swallowed it. The stars behind it were gone, not dimmed, just absent. Others saw only a shadow, a trick of the light. You saw a fracture, a problem needing a fix. You called it the crack. The name felt right. In your line of work, you knew a fracture when you saw one. This was a stress fracture on a cosmic scale, a hairline crack in the casing of reality. You told your neighbor about it, Old Man Fitz, who ran the noodle stand. He just squinted at the viewport. He wiped his hands on his apron. Fitz saw the universe as a big bowl of soup. Most things were just stray noodles to him. Just a nebula, he said, waving a dismissive hand. A bit of dust, kid. Happens all the time. But you knew dust. Dust swirled. Dust glowed when stars hit it. This thing was a hard, sharp edge. It was wrong. Utterly and completely wrong. This was no stray noodle. You spent your breaks watching it. You used a digital monocular. You tried to magnify the image. The line just got bigger. It offered no new details, no texture, no depth. It was pure, unrelenting nothing, an absence sharp enough to cut yourself on. It was the kind of clean break you see in cheap metal, stressed beyond its limits. Your mechanic's mind raced. What could cause such a thing? A tear in the fabric of space, a pressure leak from somewhere else. You thought about it in terms you understood. A cracked engine block, a compromised hull plate. You half expected to see space coolant leaking out. This was a problem, and problems needed fixing. That's what you did. You fixed things. You did not stand around talking about their theoretical implications. You found the right tool and you got to work. The universe, it seemed, had a leaky gasket. A week later, the crack grew longer. It was now clearly visible to the naked eye. People on the station started to notice. They pointed, they whispered. Experts on the news feeds had theories. They talked about gravitational lensing. They mentioned exotic matter phenomena. They gave it a fancy designation, an alphanumeric soup of letters and numbers, SG734 alpha. It sounded like a part number for a cheap droid. You just kept calling it the crack because that's what it was. And then the whispers started. At first, you thought it was a comms leak. It was a faint murmur at the edge of hearing, the kind of sound that makes you think you left a radio on. You could only catch it in the dead of night, when the station's daily hum quieted down. The whispers were not in any language you knew. They were patterns of sorrow, echoes of loss. You modified a deep space comms dish. You bypassed the station's filters. You pointed its receiver right at the crack. The whispers became clearer. The signal was clean, terribly clean. They were not just random noise, they were voices, countless voices woven together into a single, mournful song. They spoke of dying suns. They whispered of collapsing worlds. They mourned cities of crystal and light, now turned to dust. It was the sound of an entire universe in pain, a universe bleeding its sorrow into yours. The crack wasn't just a visual flaw, it was a wound, and it was weeping. The sound chilled you more than the cold of space. It was a sound of absolute finality, the sound of something great ending forever. You recorded it. You played it for Fitz. He listened for a moment. His face went pale beneath his wrinkled skin. He turned it off. "Sounds like my first marriage," he muttered. But his eyes told you he was scared. Everyone was scared now. The whispers were getting louder. Soon, everyone could hear them, even without a modified comms dish. They seeped into dreams. They echoed in the quiet corridors of the station. Fear was a grease fire now, spreading fast and smelling awful. The crack grew. The whispers became screams. And you remembered your grandfather's impossible gift. He was a junk hauler, a teller of tall tales. He smelled of engine oil and strange, distant starlight. He gave it to you on your 10th birthday. "This'll fix anything," he had said, his eyes twinkling. Anything at all. From a leaky faucet to a broken heart. You had laughed. It was just a roll of tape. But it was strange tape. It shimmered with an oily rainbow of colors. It felt cool and heavy in your hand. Too heavy for its size. It was woven from something that wasn't cloth or plastic. The strands caught the light like captured nebulae. Your grandfather called it star-woven tape. He said he'd won it in a card game, a game with a being made of pure light. He said it was a piece of the loom that wove the cosmos. You had kept it in an old metal box, a box filled with your childhood treasures, a lucky wrench, a fossilized bolt from a pre-expansion vessel, and the shimmering, impossible roll of tape. You had never used it. How could you? It felt like a legend, a story you could hold. But now, the sky was broken. The universe was screaming. Legends felt a little more believable. You retrieved the box from under your bunk. You blew a layer of dust from its lid. The contents were just as you remembered. You picked up the roll of tape. It hummed with a faint, silent energy. It felt ancient and powerful. Your grandfather's words echoed in your mind. "This'll fix anything." It was a crazy idea, a stupid idea. You were a mechanic. You were going to fix a hole in the universe. You were going to do it with a roll of tape. It was the kind of plan that gets you a padded room or a really great song written about you. You decided to bet on the song. You knew you couldn't do it alone. The crack was in high orbit. You needed clearance. You needed a real ship. You needed the sector council to listen. This was your first and biggest mistake. You made an appointment. The sector council met in a sterile, white room. It smelled of floor cleaner and self-importance. 3 beings sat on a raised platform. They looked down at you. Their expressions ranged from bored to mildly annoyed. You felt like a faulty spark plug being inspected. You explained everything. The crack, the whispers, the slow decay of reality. You tried to use simple terms, mechanical terms, a structural failure, a pressure breach. They listened with polite, empty smiles. Then you told them your plan. You held up the roll of shimmering tape. It caught the harsh lights of the chamber. It threw tiny galaxies across the walls. The council members blinked. One of them, a tall, reedy man named Valerius, leaned forward. He adjusted his immaculate robes. "Let me be certain I understand," he said. His voice was smooth as polished chrome. "You believe this cosmic event is a tear?" You nodded. "And you intend to repair it with adhesive tape?" The other two counselors snickered. They tried to hide it behind their hands. They failed badly. "It's not just tape," you said, your voice steady. "It's star-woven. It can—" Valerius held up a hand. The laughter stopped, but the scorn remained in his eyes. "You are a mechanic, a fixer of pipes and engines, a valuable if humble profession." He stood up. He paced behind the long white desk. "We have the greatest minds in the sector on this. Star science experts, theoretical engineers. They are analyzing the data. They are formulating complex solutions." He gestured vaguely. "Solutions that do not involve arts and crafts." The chamber filled with condescending chuckles. "They called you a fool. They said you were trusting old tales, a story from a crazy junk hauler. They dismissed you. They told you to get back to your engines and to stop wasting their valuable time. They recommended a psychological evaluation. That was the final insult." You walked out of that chamber. Your face was hot with anger and shame. Their laughter echoed behind you. It was the sound of gears grinding without oil, the sound of a system designed to break. They had their experts, they had their data, but they couldn't hear the screaming. You stood in the corridor. The shimmering roll of tape felt heavy in your hand. They had left you with no choice. If the experts wouldn't act, you would. The council had their complex solutions. You had a roll of tape and a very, very stupid amount of determination. Your old ship, the Stardust, was barely space-worthy. It was less a starship and more a collection of parts flying in loose formation. You had won it in a bet years ago. You mostly used it for hauling scrap. It was parked in the station's long-term storage bay, a place where old ships went to be forgotten. The hull was a patchwork of mismatched plates. The landing gear groaned in protest every time it was used. The navigation computer had a personality, a deeply pessimistic and unhelpful personality. It was, by all accounts, a rust bucket, a piece of junk. But it was your piece of junk, and it was your only hope to reach the sky. You spent the next 3 days working on it. You bypassed the docking clamps. You faked a flight plan for a routine scrap haul. You drained your accounts to buy fuel on the black market. Fitz gave you a week's worth of noodles. "For the road," he said, not meeting your eye. He knew this was not a routine trip. You worked without sleep. You drank synth coffee until your hands shook. You triple-checked every system. You patched the life support with, ironically, standard-issue duct tape. You coaxed the engines back to life. They roared and sputtered like an old man coughing. It was a terrible sound. It was the most beautiful sound you had ever heard. The ship's computer came online. Its voice was a gloomy monotone. "Propulsion systems active. Hull integrity at 47%. Probability of catastrophic failure is high. I advise staying here. The noodles are acceptable." You patted the console. "We'll be fine," you said. The computer sighed. It was a surprisingly human sound. You sat in the pilot's seat. The chair was worn and cracked. The view screen flickered. The whole ship smelled of old fuel and ozone. Outside, the station was a city of light and order. A city of rules and councils. A city that had laughed at you. You gripped the controls. You had everything you needed. A broken ship, a crazy plan, and a roll of tape inherited from a lovable liar. It was time to go fix the sky. You pushed the throttle forward. The Stardust groaned and lifted from the deck. You flew towards the growing darkness. The ship shuddered as it left the station's magnetic field. Alarms blared on the console. You ignored them. The ship's computer listed your survival chances. The numbers were not encouraging. You told it to be quiet. The crack loomed ahead. It was a vast, silent wound in the starfield. It stretched from one horizon to the other. It made your tiny ship feel like a single speck of dust. As you drew closer, the whispers returned. They poured through the hull. Not through the comms this time. They were inside your head. They screamed. They were no longer mournful. They were raw, terrified. They were the sound of a billion souls crying out at once. They pushed against your mind. They showed you images. Stars guttering like candles, planets cracking like eggs, entire galaxies unraveling like threadbare cloth. Your head pounded. Your vision swam. The ship's computer spoke, its monotone now laced with something new. External reality is destabilizing. I have no frame of reference for this. My calculations are afraid. You held on to the controls. Your knuckles were white. Just get us closer, you gritted out. You had to focus on the job. This was just a bigger engine, a bigger leak. The principles were the same. Find the weak spot, reinforce it, stop the screaming. The ship creaked and groaned. It was fighting to hold itself together, just like you were. You put on an old Enviro suit. The joints were stiff. The helmet smelled faintly of mothballs. You grabbed the roll of star-woven tape. It felt warm now. It pulsed with a soft, internal light. You secured it to your belt. You opened the ship's cargo bay doors. The void beckoned. Not the familiar, empty void of your own universe. This was something else. A raw, howling emptiness filled with the ghosts of dead stars. The screaming intensified. It was a physical force now. It hammered against the ship. It hammered against your soul. You tethered yourself to the ship. You took a deep breath. Then you stepped out into the chaos. The silence of space was gone, replaced by the symphony of a dying reality. You were floating before the great crack, a tiny mechanic about to perform the biggest patch job in history. Your hands shook as you pulled a strip of tape from the roll. It came away with a sound like tearing silk. The strip was about as long as your arm. It shimmered in your grasp. It felt alive. It flared with the light of 1,000 suns. It was brighter than anything you had ever seen. You moved slowly towards the edge of the crack. The forces pulling at you were immense. One side felt like your own familiar space. The other side, it pulled with the hunger of a great nothing. It wanted to consume you, to unmake you. Your tether strained. Your little ship groaned. You reached the edge. It was a perfect, hard line of non-existence. You held the glowing strip of tape. Your heart was a drum against your ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment your grandfather's crazy story was proven right, or you were erased from all realities. You pressed the tape against the sky. You laid it right over the seam, one half on your side, one half over the screaming void. The moment it made contact, everything changed. The tape flared with impossible light. A silent shockwave expanded outwards. The light was not hot. It was pure. It was the light of creation. The screaming stopped. Just like that. It was cut off. The sudden silence was more shocking than the noise had been. The void held its breath. Your universe held its breath. You held your breath. Your ears rang in the absolute quiet. The single strip held against impossible pressure. It had sealed a tiny portion of the wound. The tape, once shimmering, was now as black as the crack itself. But it was solid. It was real. It had fused the two edges together. You reached out a gloved hand. You touched it. It felt like cool, smooth steel. It worked. Your grandfather's impossible gift. It had actually worked. You wanted to laugh. You wanted to cry. You did a little bit of both. A choked sob and a hysterical giggle inside your helmet. You, the humble mechanic. You had just put a piece of tape on the sky, and it had stuck. The silence was a relief, but it was a temporary one. You looked at the rest of the crack. It stretched on for millions of kilometers. Your single patch was a tiny stitch on a gaping wound. It was a good start. But it was only a start. As you watched, the crack showed you glimpses of another place. It was no longer just a black line. It was a window. You saw things in its depths, swirling colors that had no names, geometric shapes that hurt your mind to look at, a universe with different rules, a place where physics had given up and gone on vacation. You saw a world of impossible cities, towers that twisted into the sky. They were beautiful, and they were crumbling. You saw beings of light and shadow fleeing from a creeping, silent decay. Their universe was failing. Its integrity was gone. It was leaking into yours. The crack was a breach in the wall between realities. Their agony had been the whispers. Their terror had been the screams. You were not just patching a hole. You were trying to save them, and you were trying to save yourself. Their dying reality was poison to your own. It was a contagion of nothingness. Spreading through the crack, the patch was holding, but you could see stress lines forming around it, faint, silvery fractures appearing in the void. One patch was not enough to seal the wound. The entire sky threatened to shatter and fall. The pressure was too great. The decay was too advanced. You looked at the roll of tape on your belt. You had enough for maybe 50 more strips, maybe 100 if you were careful. It seemed like so much back in your workshop. Out here, against the sheer scale of the problem, it was nothing. It was a single roll of tape against the end of everything. Despair began to creep in, cold and heavy. What were you thinking? You were one person in one broken ship. You could not mend this. It was too big. The council was right. You were a fool who had flown to the edge of doom for nothing. Your ship's computer crackled in your helmet. Unknown vessel approaching, high velocity, non-standard energy signature. You turned. Your heart hammered against your ribs again. This time, not with hope, but with dread. What else could this broken sky throw at you? A ship appeared. It did not drop out of faster-than-light travel. It simply arrived. One moment, there was empty space. The next, a vessel hung silently nearby. It was long and graceful. Its hull was the color of a pearl. It glowed with a soft, internal light. It looked less like a machine and more like something that had grown. It was a ship of the Elder Ones. You had only seen them in history files. An ancient, reclusive species. The first to map the stars. They were myths, legends. They were not supposed to be real. And yet, one of their ships was here. Its design was unmistakable, like a living, star-born creature. They did not hail you. They did not power weapons. They simply watched. You floated on your tether. You felt impossibly small and primitive, a creature of grease and rust in the presence of gods. You waited for them to act, to destroy you, to ignore you. A voice spoke in your mind, not like the screams from the crack. This was different. It was calm. It was ancient. It was like the feeling of cool water and warm sun. It was a voice that had seen galaxies be born. You have done the impossible, it said. You have mended what cannot be mended. The ship of the Elder Ones moved closer. It did not use thrusters. It simply willed itself forward. It stopped a respectful distance away. They saw what you had done. They saw the tiny, perfect patch, the single strip of tape holding back the end of a universe. They saw your rust bucket ship. They saw you. We watched the tear grow. The voice continued. It was not one voice, you realized. It was many. A chorus of ancient minds speaking as one. We saw our star science fail. Our greatest energies were useless against it. We were preparing for the end. You did not know how to respond. You were just a mechanic. You did not talk to ancient, godlike star beings. You could barely talk to the sector council. So you just floated there. A silent, awestruck figure in a clunky suit. You hold a fragment of the first loom, the voice said, a sense of wonder in its tone. A tool of creation. We thought it was lost to time. You use it with a simple, direct purpose. You do not ask why it works. You only know that it must. Their ship extended a new tether to you. It was a filament of pure light. It attached itself gently to your suit. Your solution is correct. But you lack the means to complete it. We can help. Your heart is strong. Your hands are clever. Let us weave the worlds together. They offered their aid, their advanced science, their ancient knowledge. They saw your simple, practical act not as foolishness. They saw it as wisdom, the kind of wisdom that experts and councils often forget. The wisdom of fixing what is broken, right in front of you. They understood the tape. They understood the crack. And they understood you. Hope returned, a powerful, brilliant surge of it. You were not alone anymore. You had an unexpected ally, the oldest and most powerful ally imaginable. You had a chance.